Hello, Aaron. Hello, John. Welcome to our office hours. Just give me 1 second and then we'll get started. Okay, cool. Morvareed, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the group and those that are watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, what's the other ones? YouTube, Twitch. We'll get you in a moment. All right, Morvareed.
All right. Well, hi everyone. Happy to join you all. I'm Morvareed Salehpour. I'm a business and technology attorney. So, when a business or a founder is having difficulty closing a deal with a customer, a vendor, or a partner, or wanting to license or monetize their technology or intellectual property, that's where I come in. I help with contracts, data privacy, intellectual property, and exits, particularly in the technology space. So, working with a lot of software, SaaS, AI, digital health, and various types of tech service businesses.
I love it. So, everyone that's tuning in, please use the text chat to ask questions or share what you have going on. I will relay those to Morvareed. We'll get some answers, feedback, insights. It's really important to give as much context as you can so the answers or insights, feedback you get is more relevant and purposeful for helping you out. And remember, we're here for you to interact with the mentor. So don't be shy, ask those questions. While we wait for some questions, Morvareed, there's been a lot of AI everywhere and founders thinking that they have to do AI. I'm curious from what you've been seeing with different clients and going on in the communities that you're involved in, what are some of the most important things for a founder to be aware of before they start throwing AI into their product?
Yeah, so as a background first, I'm going to share that everything we're talking about today is purely educational. None of this is legal advice. You need to reach out to me individually if you want to onboard a lawyer or another lawyer to actually get legal advice. So this is all educational. And in terms of what I kind of see in use case of AI being used with businesses, I think, there is a moment in time right now where there is a lot of PR, right? And so a lot of people are trying to incorporate AI into their startup just to try to get traction. And I think it comes down to, do you actually need this technology? Is this actually something that is adding something to your offering, or are you just adding it to try to get traction? And I think that always happens whenever there is a buzzword. Everyone's trying to jump on, but a lot of businesses may not actually need it. Like, does it make sense for your business?
I'm glad you said that. I agree. Let me see what John says. When does everyone anticipate Skynet being completed? I hope never. Let's just stick with that. Uh, more. Oh, yeah. When's the next hike? John's asking because you do lead some really wonderful community hikes, specifically with UCLA alumni and others. So yeah, why not? Let's hear about that.
Sure. So, if anyone is a UCLA alum, I've got a pre Thanksgiving hike actually coming up this Sunday, and then I will have a holiday hike in December with ugly holiday sweaters encouraged. And then for the tech community hikes, I don't currently have anything planned for the rest of the year, so I may pick those back up in 2026.
I love it. I love themed. Anything themed is super fun. Yeah, and if anyone's interested, you can connect with Morvareed and learn more about the events that she organizes at her LinkedIn profile. It's attached to all of the event pages that you probably found your way to this event too. So check those out, connect, and be sure to check it out. While we're waiting for people to be brave and bold as new people are finding their way over to LinkedIn, I see. Ask questions, people. Share what you got going on. Let us interact with you. Um, you mentioned right in the green room before we got started that you just finished an M&A deal. I'm curious for those that are a little bit later stage or thinking about a acquisition as an exit. What are the top things that they should be aware of before they start moving in that process? How can they help themselves not spend a lot of money cleaning up messes or making themselves more valuable to a potential acquirer.
Yeah, I think that's an area where businesses don't really realize the importance of having everything kind of buttoned up early on. And that's why I think realistically, if you're trying to maximize valuation in a bit in your business and trying to really optimize how much you sell it for, it's something you should be really getting a start on at least a couple years in advance, right? Because there are several areas that you will need to clean up and ensure are in appropriate shape so that when a buyer comes in and they do due diligence, and that's going to be a, usually it's a more intensive due diligence. Even if it's a small business, they want to see your books, they want to see your contracts, they want to see that you own your IP. So for that to go smoothly and for there not to be issues that arise, you need to make sure your books are done correctly, right? That you, and several years, not just for like the past year, right? It has to be several years of the financials being clean and you're able to show the revenue, right? Everything looks correct and is correct. Same with the legal, all your agreements with customers and vendors, all and your employees and contractors, all of that needs to be clean. You need to be able to show like, hey, there is actually, revenue that's on the books and is promised under these agreements. There is, we have the right language in place around intellectual property. So there's not going to be some contractor coming out of the woodwork and saying, we know what, I own the IP, right? So all of these things are just things that have to be cleaned up, and the better buttoned up they are, the more value your business is going to have, and also the easier the whole process is going to be for you because you're going to have a much smoother due diligence, and you're going to have less back and forth in negotiating the actual acquisition or purchase agreement because there's not going to be certain risks that the buyer discovers doing due diligence where they now feel they need to be more aggressive for protecting themselves against liabilities because of unclear or contracts you had or other kind of issues around IP. So then they need to be more aggressive in having you basically indemnify them, meaning that if something goes wrong, you're going to cover them for all those issues.
Yeah, that's really important. Especially like just the concept of de-risking the deal for them in order to raise the leverage you have and increase the value that you are able to essentially sell the business for. You touch on the IP angle, and I was talking to a photographer in one of these communities the other day, and the idea of work for hire came up. Um, there was a little bit of confusion about who owned the IP for the job they photographed, and I'm curious from a business owner, a founder's standpoint, can you kind of like touch on what a work for hire is and how that's established in order to transfer the copyright of the contractor to your business?
Yeah, so this is an area that it's just so common. Businesses get it wrong. Like so many startups get this wrong because they again aren't really investing in the right agreements in place. And it's not an issue if you're not a successful business, but as soon as you start to get some traction, soon as you start to get investment, you're starting to get deals and revenue, that's when these kind of issues come up because that's when people who could potentially make a claim decide, hey, it's actually worth making a claim, right? And they'll come out of the woodwork, right? So it really is something that you have to be proactive about. And cleaning it up is costly, right? It definitely is costly to try to clean this up. And I've had situations where, for example, I'll use one situation where a client, they hadn't worked with an attorney, they had used a vendor to create their technology. They had spent, probably 100,000, probably more than $100,000 to build out this technology, and they didn't have the right agreement in place. So when they wanted to stop working with the vendor and use a different vendor to continue to build out the technology, that original vendor who they were unhappy with basically said, you don't own this, this is mine, I was just giving you a license to use it. So tough luck. And now they could have gone, to court and disputed it, but it was a badly drafted agreement, so it was just going to be more time and cost, and they didn't have a clear winner there. So they decided to, go ahead, redo it with a new vendor. And so that's where they had brought me in to help them actually negotiate because they'd learned from their mistake. They're like, we don't want to do this again and not end up with no technology, right? And unfortunately, that's very common, particularly when you're using contractors and vendors. The default is everything belongs to them, and you need very specific kind of language, and it has to be very kind of the more specific you can even be is very important for being able to make sure that the intellectual property is transferred over and is owned by the company. And there's specific requirements that I want to see in there if it's like for software or if it's hardware, if it's both, right? There's certain thing like i- there's certain specificities that I want to make sure are worked in around what is actually being developed. So I think any business who is creating intellectual property and they're using service providers, contractors, even the founders, like there should be good agreements in place. And one of the things that even if you're a small business and you want to kind of limit your investment into this, at minimum, it makes sense to work with an attorney to draft like a contractor or service provider agreement that has the right language around intellectual property in there so you can feel comfortable that you actually own your IP. And again, this will set you up well for the next stage, whether you're looking to get investment because due diligence is going to happen there, or you're looking to get acquired because due diligence happens there too. And so they expect to see these proper agreements in place. And it's difficult, so it's very hard to go back and clean up if you've worked with someone and you're not gonna, you're no longer paying them, that you worked with them years ago. There's no incentive for them to now come clean things up, right? So this is the time to do it is at the beginning.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And I think it also touches on another important kind of theme with why you use contracts. It's to communicate openly and transparently and make sure that everyone is on the same page with what's going on and how things will develop in the future, and also how you'll handle conflict resolution and different situations that might not be so easy to foresee, right? At least there's like some sort of process that you've both agreed upon. This is how we'll handle it if, this arises or something unforeseen arises. And it's something that I find really kind of alarming with founders, entrepreneurs, especially, you know, those who are kind of the most eager or desperate, and they're putting a lot of like investment of their time, their energy, and capital into a venture to the point where it's detrimental to themselves, right? They're overextending
Mhm.
themselves, they're taking on way too much risk, and then they're engaging with other people without using contracts and just setting themselves up for a lot of these problems down the line because, again, when conflict arises, they are going to have a hard time negotiating with that other person because at that point, it's already a very uh, kind of,
Contentious
yes,
situation.
thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, situation that a lot of
Yeah.
emotions are at play at that point, right?
Yeah.
So when you're
Mhm.
at the earliest stage, able to use those contracts and be very clear with each other, hopefully, the emotions aren't there yet, and you're able to be calm and collected and very objective with each other. Or if emotions do pop up at that point, it's a red flag that, you know what, this isn't a good relationship to enter into because we don't get along, right? So I'm curious too, like, in that regard, what would you say to founders, entrepreneurs who are thinking about saving money by not using contracts or feeling like contracts put or create a situation of conflict that they're trying to avoid, like, oh, I can trust them, I don't need to do that, like that's a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, I've seen all those situations end up in a lawsuit and the business falling apart. Right? There's always a lawsuit. Someone is either the business falls apart, right? They're in a dispute, the business falls apart, no one's operating it, or someone gets the business and the other person, is taken advantage of or has to be paid out. So it's never a situation that moves forward productively and leads to success. Really, you are going to be on the same page on day one, right? That's the day where everyone's excited, everyone's trying to get this done. And if you can't get on the same page to get an agreement in place, then it's exactly what you say, Gary. You guys are not meant to work together. Because if asking for a contract, which is a standard legal term that anyone who is legitimately doing business is not going to be surprised by a request for a contract, or it's a requirement, right, to even put these agreements really in place. Like, for example, if you set up a company and you don't have the corporate paperwork in place, then that company is not actually, if someone can basically say it's a false company, right, they're going to be able to kind of come after you individually because you are not actually honoring the corporate framework. So these are documents you should have in place already, and if you're kind of not doing that and your founders don't want to do that, that's problematic, right? I mean, it's something where you have to be able to come on it's good to have the hard conversations uh, from the start, because that's how you know whether it makes sense to do business or not. And I've had situations like this that I've had to help navigate clients through. And I'll use like a recent example. A client wanted to do like a new kind of joint venture with some new individual, with the company, the founders of certain company with founders of another company. And we got the document that was provided. It was very one-sided. It was like, this is not fair. This is not what you're telling me you guys want to do. Like, this is, you need to go have a discussion with them and see, like, is this really, do you guys really want to work together? And if it does, it has to be fair and it has to look like XYZ. So, I coached them through having those discussions on the business side. And after months of back and forth, they were able to come to, something that they all agreed that was fair, and they were able to sign and move forward. But that was important to have those discussions on the front end. Like, not just sign something because we want to get started and we're excited, but no, like, is this actually something we're all comfortable with and we feel is fair and we can live with long term?
I love that. John Walter Mosey Hampton asks, what are some good methods that Morvareed has found to diffuse tension and disagreements internally between colleagues and coworkers?
Well, I think it's again, if it's like a real dispute and you've gone to a situation where you both have attorneys and you're kind of going back and forth, at that point, the attorneys will go back and forth and will encourage you guys. If you have a good attorney, the attorney will tell you, like, yeah, your claim's not great or whatever, or you do have a more of a claim. So we'll kind of advise you on where, like, settlement makes sense. And in 90 like 9% of situations, settlement makes sense because it's very costly to go to court. um but if it's like more, I will, since a lot of what I do for my clients these days is on the deal making side. I will talk about kind of what if there's a situation where there's some tension arising in a deal. So everyone wants to make the deal, but there's some like tension, and some of that I tell clients, like, again, you need to go have like a very straightforward like conversation. Here's your talking points about what you need to kind of say, and you gotta see if you guys are on the same page for this. If there's ever, like, I feel like, if sometimes maybe clients who are less experienced with business may feel uncomfortable, like, advocating for themselves. So I'll tell them, like, if you need to blame me, just blame me and be like, my attorney is insisting that I asked for XYZ, or we talk about XYZ. So I'm like, hey, if you want to blame me, that's fine. Like, no problem. But ultimately, I think it's important for the business people to have discussions, and then, if necessary, certain calls, business and legal teams for both sides are involved. But I try to leave the legal involvement, like legal being on the call, until the kind of end of the deal closing, because I think it's a lot more efficient, and I think it feels less antagonistic for parties when only the business people are on the call and the legal people aren't on the calls, but particularly when business terms are being discussed. But again, a lot of clients don't necessarily know the strategy, so that's where the coaching comes in, and telling them, like, this is what you need to accomplish during your call, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, John has a follow up question. What kind of resources can Morvareed suggest to startups or founders or individuals who have zero funding for legal services? If I, as a private business owner, need some simple legal assistance, but I'm already operating at a loss and making no money, what kind of resources are available for business purposes to business owners who don't have much in a way of financial resources? So yeah, so this comes up to often. There's a lot of founders who are struggling with, their financial situation. They want to get going with their own business, whether that's as a freelancer, doing contract work, or starting an app or something like that. Yeah, I hear from different mentors and yourself often that there are options, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you what you would suggest to seek those resources out.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think if you're starting a business, you have to be willing to invest in it. Like, you're just not going to be able to not like do it for zero cost. That's impossible. And those are not the businesses I've seen succeed. And you really can't go to an investor or any other, like a search firm and say like, "Hey, I don't want to I'm not ready to invest in this, but I want you to invest in this," right? So, I think there is some unrealistic maybe like expectations with some like first time founders where they aren't really prepared or understand that they do actually, if they want to build a sustainable business, they need to invest in this. And whether that means, like putting certain things on your credit card, right? Like you do have to, there is a minimum you have to invest. For a lot of like early stage founders that have smaller budgets, what I tell them is I can like work with them to prioritize. Like there's probably like 10 things you need to do, but I can help prioritize and be like, this is the most important. Let's do this. And then we'll come back to the other ones when you have more of a budget, right? Like help them kind of space it out. And also kind of be involved at a high strategy level. Like you may not have the budget to have me involved to, you know, revise like a whole agreement or draft the whole thing or get on a call with you to negotiate a deal with the other side, like all of that. But at minimum, you can kind of get me involved on the strategy level. So if there's a specific deal you're trying to close with a customer and there's some weird things coming up, you can get me on a call and be like, this is the weird thing that's coming up. Like, what should I be worried about? What should I argue, right? What should I be advocating for in this deal? And that's where I can kind of tell the client, like, these are the issues. They can take on the laboring or of effectuating it to keep their costs lower, but at least they have guidance. So they're not operating in a vacuum. And I'll use an example of how important it is to get legal involved early, because this is really this is how you build a sustainable business. So I had a startup that came to me about a year and a half after they'd been operating, and they'd spent time and resources to build out a prototype with software and hardware, and they had used consultants to kind of create the product and think about how to launch it and all that. But when they came to me and I looked at their business model, it was illegal. And so they had been operating like actually criminally, and they had thought, oh well, I found a loophole, right? Like no one else is doing this, so this is the way to do it. And they had that point, it was they had to do a 180 in the business that would have cost a lot of money and time, and they decided to shut down their business. But all of that could have been avoided if they'd come to me early on, day one, week one, whatever, first month, second month, and said, this is what we're trying to do. What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? Like, is this the right direction? Should we like be maybe structuring it in a different way? And I would have been able to give them that feedback, and they would have had a business that they could actually get investment in. No one's going to invest in a legal business model, right? No one wants that liability, but it's that small shift, right? If they had spent a couple hours with me early on, they could have had a business that was continuing on.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. I see this all the time in all these different communities, whether it's, on Reddit or TikTok or something else. There's so many these founders again who are typically engineers that they can create something very quickly and they rush to it without going through like the proper processes of like like beyond just talking to a lawyer to make sure that what they're going to do is operationally like legal, but they don't even start talking to potential customers that they want to have and see if what they're building is something that is going to address a want or a need that these people have. They skip so many steps at the earliest stage because they're in a rush to get to market as quickly as possible, thinking that their success depends on being as quick as they can, which is like a perpetuated bit of nonsense that I think is really rooted in a lot of TechCrunch articles from back in the day. Like I don't know if
Mhm.
you read a lot of articles from them, but so many of those articles are sensationalized where they talk about this new startup that just raised $5 million seed round or something, and they
Mhm.
say that it happened, within 3 months of right. But usually at 3 months is how long they were fundraising, not when they started the company. They started the company like 7 years ago, and they're slowly building up to that point. But the way that the articles are covering it, it's very misleading, and it gives a lot of these entrepreneurs, these early stage founders, the wrong impression of what success is, of being as fast as you can. If you don't have a, like, I see people saying like, oh, I haven't gotten a first customer and I launched 3 weeks ago. Should I quit? It's like, what are you talking about? What? No, like you just don't, you're not doing things in the right order. So yeah, it's very important to talk to a lawyer and run through the business model, the financial model, what you're trying to do, what industry. And I see this mostly related to finance. A lot of engineers are trying to use AI to hack some stuff together to essentially give financial advice about stock market, right? Like, oh, well, we can track all these different trends, and this app will tell you what to invest in. And it's like, I don't. I'm pretty sure there's like legal requirements that you should talk to a lawyer. And they're like, why? What are you talking about? It's just telling people what to invest in. It's just sharing data, and it's like there's a difference there. Like you should probably run this by. But yeah, so it's really good to hear you, like, bring that up and share that. So we got more people that have joined us over on LinkedIn and popping over on Twitch, popping in and out. If you are new, and also Doug and G Smith, welcome. If you have any questions or you'd like to share what you are working on, please do post, or feel free, if you're on Start Mata, again, you can raise your hand. I can bring you up on stage and use the microphone and camera to interact with Morvareed directly. But if you're shy, just use the text chat. And everyone else on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook, text chat. Post your questions. I want Morvareed to talk to you, not me. I'm doing my best here. Yeah, while we wait for this, Doug says, this is all really great. I found out about the stream just now and can't stay. Hope to join another session soon. Well, I'm glad that you popped in and got something out of this, Doug. Thank you so much. Um, John has another question that I missed earlier. What are some common mistakes that startups make legally? So I'm sure that's a wide breadth that you can touch on, but I'm curious too. Like, I want to kind of hear about the founders who are just starting, like you kind of touched on, right? Just talk and figure out if this is even legal. So we'll start there, but I also want to hear about later stage founders who, again, are in the process of scaling or maybe positioning themselves for an exit acquisition. What are the most common mistakes you see that you think people really need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think early stage businesses, like, common issues are just not setting up their corporate paperwork correctly, not having founder agreements in place. Founder disputes are not uncommon. A lot of people have gone through founder disputes, call them kind of like business divorces, right? It happens. It's not unusual. And so having that agreement, like a well-drafted founder agreement, that prevents you guys having to have like a back and forth and like so much more drama, because you will already have terms in there about what happens when we no longer agree. Right? So it's so important to have that in place. So that's a common issue, just people thinking like, hey, it's my friend, it's my family, it's all going to be good. It's not necessarily going to be good. So definitely important to have the good agreement in place. I think the IP issue we talked about is another just really common issue where people don't actually own the intellectual property of the company, though they think they do. just because the right agreements are in place. Em I guess employee issues are big. Like, I think a lot of startups think they can just pay people in equity, which no, like you need to pay them at least minimum wage. Like, so then they get hit with, employee like misclassification, class actions and stuff. So yeah, there's no such thing as sweat equity. Like you actually still have to pay people. So that's a big issue. I feel like that startups get wrong is the employment kind of side of stuff. And that's this is another thing. Some startups, like, because they're trying to be like, "Oh, I don't wanna spend as much, I'm just," they're giving equity to everyone. It's like, what are you doing to your cap table? Investors are gonna look at that cap table and be like, "Why is it a mess? Why are there all these random people on here? And why," so you're both gonna look bad to investors, but it's also gonna dilute you and like, why do you want all these random people on there? Like I think startups, a lot of startup, or at least particularly first time startup founders, don't do a good job about thinking like, well, I need to be strategic about who I actually give equity to. And if you think this business is gonna be successful, why are you giving this away out willy-nilly? Like be strategic. Like who actually should get equity?
I think part of that is a lot of these founders don't realize that equity is finite. You only have 100%, right? And it's it's something that maybe, like, yeah, in the early stages it doesn't have any meaning and value because like you haven't built anything yet, but like you said, the goal is to build something with value, and once it does have value, if you don't have enough equity to utilize to bring in investors or some very powerful strategic partners or something else like that, like you don't have an incredible resource that you should have at that stage when it's really necessary to utilize. Um, I think it's really great that you brought up the employment aspect of this too. A lot of founders, like you said, don't understand how to hire people, how to pay people and compensate them, and what immense laws and penalties are associated with doing that wrong, especially just like in the concept of an employee versus a contractor, right? Especially in California with new laws. I don't know how much that's changed recently, but I like to hear, yeah, your thoughts and opinions on some of like the new rulings that or laws that have maybe been passed recently, and yeah, some uh, tips of what a founder should not be doing when they're trying to bring people onto the team.
Well, I think, they really should be carefully considering like employee compliance, right? Like making sure people are classified correctly, but particularly in California, right? We have pretty stringent laws on who is an employee and who's a contractor, right? And again, so this is you have to kind of think like do a kind of like an analysis, think about that. Again, some it's not uncommon for startups to sometimes take a risk and misclassify, like basically misclassify people. They'll like take a risk, but there's if you're going to do that, there's certain like if you're going to hire someone as not an employee, there's ways to like think about like how can I do this to like reduce the risk, right? Like there are, for example, third party staffing agencies that you can hire people through so that they're the employee of the staffing agency and you're hiring a vendor, right? So there's ways to kind of try to reduce the risk if you don't want to bring on someone as an employee, but you need to be thinking about kind of employee issues. And I always tell like clients like, hey, this is like a risk and these are the ways you can kind of like reduce the risk. And some people are open to more risk, some people are open to less risk, and ultimately, like, it's probably not going to be a problem until it is a problem, right? That's kind of it. Like if you keep a good working environment and everyone's happy, everyone's getting paid well, like there's probably going to be less of a potential issue versus if, you don't have a great working environment and people aren't getting paid fairly. And they're more likely to get, angry and be like, I'm going to actually push on this, right? I'm going to bring a lawsuit.
Let me see. New people coming in. Welcome. please, again, have I said this before, use the text chat to ask questions, share what you're working on, get you some advice, feedback, insights. That's why we're here. I would love to hear from you people. You're wonderful for joining us, and I'm glad you're being entertained listening to us talk. But I want to interact with you. So please, yes, while we wait for more questions, let me see. John. John says, thanks for the great answers to all my questions. He also says, like, follow, and subscribe to Doug. Let me see what else. Okay. All right. So, kind of touch on a couple different things. I think another kind of misconception, and it's come up a couple times, due diligence. I'm curious, Morvareed, could you kind of give us like a high level, step by step of what due diligence looks like when you're in the process of fundraising and trying to get that check signed?
Yeah, so anytime there's due diligence, there will be a period of time for the parties so as the company that is looking at getting invested in or acquired, you're going to be asked to provide multiple categories of information, right? So they'll want to see like financials and corporate documents and contracts and all that to kind of do an analysis on the business and determine if they see it as something valuable, to figure out the kind of risk profile of the business too, right? That's where they kind of look at the your liabilities from like a legal and regulatory compliance side, from a contractual liability perspective, all of that, to kind of understand like, hey, is this a good investment? Is this a good, potential acquisition? They look at your IP too, right? They want to know all your IP. They want to know, are there patents or the trademarks? Have other people infringed? Are you infringing on other people's IP? Like they go deep into the details on these things. So again, that's why you have to be prepared. Like you have to know, and it's getting even more um complex because so many businesses these days, they're all like technology businesses. They all have data. They're all connected to the cloud. So in the last, couple like acquisitions and mergers I've done, like, particularly being in the technology space, like data privacy and cybersecurity are all part of the due diligence as well, right? It's all they want to make sure you've been complying with all the data privacy laws. They want to make sure you've complied with cybersecurity, you have the right protocols in place so that there hasn't been a data breach or there's unlikely to be, a data breach, soon, so that again, that's a big liability risk. So they don't want to face that with your potential customers, for example, right? So it really is like everything in your business should be buttoned up. And for example, a lot of tech companies, as they go out to both to get customers, like particularly if you're dealing in a sensitive area, like one of the things to get investment is you got to have good customer base often to have good revenue. So both to get customers and to get investors is doing things like SOC 2 audits to show your cybersecurity framework is up to date.
Yeah, I again, great insights. I think so much of this again are things that a lot of founders are never thinking about, especially at the early stage and planning for. So hopefully this helps a lot of people that are listening and tuning in. We have a question from developer KP. I am sorry if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but they ask, "Hi, how do I navigate AI generated IP, specifically patent?" So I'm curious about this. We'll get a little bit more context, hopefully, but let's start with the generalities of AI generated IP.
So in general, like the Copyright Office and courts have said anything that it's kind of AI generated isn't like really protectable because there has to be like human creation involved, right? There has to be human involvement. So that's kind of, I think maybe a confusion for like a lot of, founders or people who are just trying to create things with AI. So there are And I think the interesting thing is where the courts haven't quite drawn the line yet is where does the where does the line come in where something is both um is protectable that started off as or AI is incorporated within it. Because I think most content, probably even now and moving forward, is going to be a mix. It's not going to be purely AI generated, right? That's the easy answer. Purely AI, okay, that's not really something that's creative. And it's not going to be, most stuff is probably not going to be purely human created, right? Again, that's an easy answer. It's, protectable. But now it's going to be a mix of, okay, maybe they incorporate some AI items in there. Maybe something started off as AI, but then a human went in and like really like changed it. So it's like very different. So I think courts still have to grapple with what is required to actually turn something into protectable. Some of the guidance that they've given out so far has been that, for example, they had a situation where someone had tried to copyright like a photo that they had generated from an AI platform, and then they on top of that they did some like Photoshop and some other alteration, and the court said like that minimal alteration that's not sufficient to make something protectable. Another person had like tried to protect or copyright a like graphic novel where they like created the text and then they used AI for the images, and the copyright office was like, well, the only part that's protectable is like the text that you came up with, right? So I think right now they're kind of like trying to differentiate, but ultimately I think the courts will. There's a lot of cases pending right now around like intellectual property issues around AI. So I think we will just see them create more clarity. But there's still people who are trying to make applications to the U.S. government for protection of all of this to see what the kind of copyright office will come down with, right? But ultimately, like it has to be like something that is a substantial like change on what AI generated.
Yeah, developer adds, like for example, design documents in CAD product design, purely AI generated designs. So is like building on what you just said, it doesn't seem like that would be something you can patent at all because AI is generating it, and at this point, it's like AI. The way AI generation works, typically, it's pulling from other creative endeavors and mixing it together. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, AI is generally like it's scraped like a lot of AI scrape the internet, right? It's just pulling from other things. And um first of all, it's gonna show up for everyone, right? Like it's not gonna just show up for you. So what's the competitive value of that really, right? And a lot of intellectual properties, like the whole point is it's unique, right? And it's different. So yeah, I mean, in generally like the copyright office has said like if it's something purely AI generated it's not kind of protectable, and that's not really kind of surprising.
Yeah. As a person with a photography degree, I am in support of AI having no protection at all when it comes to whatever it's creating. So hopefully, if things go correctly and there's justice in this world, it won't ever get any sort of protections like that. Dr. Paxmore says in regards to the cybersecurity and content leaks. I like to store my user data in a plain text file on the website. Very secure. They also just added, uh, let me see. Sorry, I just clicked on the wrong thing. You should have an AI expert on to talk about this sort of stuff. I'll ask my friend if they have any suggestions. Well, thank you. Please do. Um, the thing about AI is that literally nobody knows how AI works. That's another good point too at this juncture with AI.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people are just confused about the use of the technology even, right? And they don't. I think it's also hard for a lot of people who are using like generative AI. I think they think they can do anything with it, but it's one of those things, like I was just having this conversation earlier today where it's like, if you're not an actual expert in that area, you won't know it's wrong because it confidently says whatever it's saying. And unless you actually are substantially familiar with whatever that area it is, finance, medicine, whatever, you'll be like, okay, yeah, this sounds right. You don't know, right? It's only like the doctor who'd be able to tell, like, that's totally wrong.
Yeah, Dr. Paxmer adds, the researchers don't know how AI makes decisions. There was a study recently about how an LLM was making predictions about who would have cancer based on these massive data sets. Then they realized it was using GPS data. Oh my gosh. And it was selecting people who were visiting a cancer treatment center. Like, yeah, yeah. There's so much of this, and I actually I'm glad that this kind of came up, and you just said that also, Morvareed, about how if you're not an expert, you don't know how to evaluate this. And a lot of people are using ChatGPT or others to ask very critical questions, especially revolving around business or legal aspects. So this too, I'm curious, like, do you have any examples of how that has cost someone a lot of money that you've had to go in and fix a problem with because they just decided to bypass a lawyer or a CPA or something else like that and use AI to get answers?
Well, I guess the people who do that, they're not gonna be my clients. That's fine. They're gonna end up in not so good situations. I've had some clients who, have reached out to me and they're like, "Hey, like this is what I'm trying to do. Here's like what I drafted this off of, one of the like one of the chat GPT or whatever. Is this usable? What do you think?" And the good thing is they're coming to me and I've every single time it's been like, this is horrible. Like, do not use this. This doesn't like what you like. I literally had one client who had like drafted something. Again, they don't know what they don't know, right? So what they needed done involved actually three different like agreements because it was the way it needed to be structured for like corporate governance and the fact that there was different entities at issue, and he had like drafted one agreement. I'm like, this is not usable. Like, I know you used AI to draft this. Please do not use this. And he was like, okay, fine. Can you like prepare me something? So that's been my experience. At least, my clients, like, they are willing to take the feedback of, they aren't just using it blindly. They're like, okay, like I'm running it by my expert, by my lawyer. And if a lawyer says no, don't do it, they're like, okay, we're not gonna do it.
I appreciate that too. I think also that's something important too, like for anyone that's an entrepreneur, whether it's trying to again build a business or build a like freelance business, be aware of who your ideal customers should be, who you want to work with, and who you should not work with, and don't waste your time trying to like cater to everyone, service everyone, chase after everyone. Just focus on who's going to be your ideal customer, make your life a lot more enjoyable and easier and more fun. So yeah, Dr. Passmore added more about this craziness with the LLMs. A similar research story about AI with false positives, where the LLM was supposed to identify images with blueberries, and it was always blueberries or some specific species of bird, and they don't know why it was picking the bird. But the fact is that nobody, including the developers working on the LLMs, understood why they make the choices they make. Seems very important to design thinking to set the correct parameters so you understand why it's making the decisions it's making. Just again, a heads up for anyone that's working on LLMs or AI. You should definitely know why it's doing these things. John Walter Mosi Hanson asks, quick legal consultation cost question. At some point, I should set up an LLC or DBA for my photography, cinematography work business. How much does Morvareed charge for intro customers, clients who need the very basic intro business legal stuff done? So that's something interesting right there. I'm sure you caught that, Morvareed. Essentially conflating an LLC with a DBA as if or an LLC or a DBA. So yeah, more read. I love for you to kind of like give us a high level in terms of business entities that uh, you can create, and how they differ and benefit from a sole proprietorship, being you're just running the business without any sort of business entity.
Yeah, there's just different forms of businesses, right? So it really depends on how you're operating your business, what your kind of goals are on the short term and long term, and both legal considerations and tax considerations. So those I always tell my clients who are at the stage of setting up a business, like, let's get your tax advisor involved as well, so you kind of really understand and make a best informed decision for what your goals are. So yeah, you can be, just a sole proprietor, right? And that'll be, your own kind of assets are on the hook, right? If you set up a company, whether that's a LLC or corporation, it gives you certain protections, right? So that your personal assets aren't on the line. But again, like I said, you have to ensure you have corporate paperwork, you have, certain banking accounts, everything's like really separate from yourself. So that you don't face the risk of it being ignored and being treated like a sole proprietor. So you actually have to honor the legality of it and go through with treating it separately in order for that to kind of go forward. And then there's just like different like decision making between those different forms based on, are you trying to like bring on employees? Are you trying to scale? Are you trying to get investment? Are you trying to get venture capital? All of that will kind of come in and help make your decision. And yeah, one of the first things I'll do with a client at that stage is like help them go through that specific to their situation so they can make an informed decision.
I love it. We'll circle back real quick to the cost question, but because we're coming up on time, we have a question from YouTube. Corporate Bank 3437 asks, I'm trying to build an adverse media screening tool that helps compliance professionals screen companies and individuals. The tool relies on pulling data from different APIs to speed up the screening. What sort of legal repercussions should I be aware of when building this product? How do I make this product compliant when it comes to data privacy laws or any other relevant laws? So I yeah, I'll let you answer
Yeah,
and
this
give you the spiel about not your lawyer.
Yeah, this is veering in the realm of legal advice. So this is something you can book a strategy session on my website if you want to kind of get like talk through it in detail and get some initial feedback. If you're, not ready for like full engagement, you're welcome. I have 30 to 1 hour minute strategy sessions available. So you're welcome to book that and we can talk about your situation in detail and I can give you my kind of initial thoughts and feedback on what I think.
Awesome. With that said, going back to John's secondary question in terms of costs, what kind of like costs should someone be kind of like prepared for? And I know it goes back to again what you're saying about earlier when it comes to someone that has limited finances, that there are ways to prioritize the most important tasks to focus on first and then move on from there. But in terms of just like getting started or creating a business entity for a contractor such as John, what should they expect in terms of like a price range?
Yeah, well, I think, it really behooves like businesses to at least do the strategy session. So at least that gives them some initial guidance and they can get like more understanding of what they're trying to do, what the potential costs related to what they actually specifically want to do is, and then they can move forward. And a lot of times, again, if you really don't have that much of a budget, I'll provide, guidance and be like, hey,
Yeah.
this is what you need to do. Here are some resources where you can kind of do it at more cost effectively with me being involved in the high level. Like sometimes I'll tell client like new potential clients and they'll be like, oh, we have a very limited budget to like set up a business, right? Like we don't, we can't spend like several $1,000s or whatever. I'll be like, okay, well, most cost effective would be, maybe use a different resource and then use me as like to give you kind of guidance or like review the main agreement and give you some feedback on that. That way I'm less involved, right? I'm spending less time on it. So again, once we can have like again a discussion during a strategy session. I can kind of understand your goals and I can kind of give you feedback on how you can kind of get there the most efficiently.
With that in mind, how can you, or what would you recommend a potential client doing, whether it's working with you or any other lawyer, in terms of doing a lot of the legwork first? So when they sit down with you or any other sort of like, service professional like a CPA or someone else, that they have the proper documentation ready to go, so you can hit the ground running instead of starting from scratch and getting it all together, like, as a much drawn out or more drawn out process.
Yeah, my experience has been clients don't know what they need to gather and get together and like what information I need because they don't know what, again, that's like where I come in. I ask the questions they don't know to ask, right? So that's why I think one of the first things I do with clients is like, even if like for example, a client reaches out and they're like, "Oh, we have the software, we want to like start monetizing it." And the first part of the engagement is I get them on a phone call and I start asking the questions, the hard questions, like how does your software work? Like how are you thinking about monetizing it? Like what do you want to do with long term? What is short term? What features are there? Like I start asking all these questions so they can like start answering it. And sometimes they'll have the answers and a lot of times they'll not have the answers. So then they'll have to go back and like gather that information. But that like first kind of 45 minutes an hour we spend together to really get into for me to ask the hard questions is a lot of times where things start fleshing out for them because it's things that they haven't even thought about in their business. But I have worked with hundreds of businesses, so there's things that come up for me where I'm like, this is something you should be thinking about, or is this something you should be doing, or you should be doing XYZ, and they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Even things as interesting as, so like, again, because I work with a lot of small and mid-sized businesses, like business and legal sometimes mingle. So I even help clients figure out and advise them on like pricing strategies, just because they haven't gone through it all. So it's like, here are some other pricing strategies for you to like consider.
I love that. That's something that comes up a lot is, yeah, the value that lawyers have in terms of monetization strategies as well, because they understand what are assets and how those assets can be utilized to generate revenue. So yeah, whether that's IP or something else. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up too. There's a couple more questions. I know we're up on time, so if you have a hard stop, let me know and we'll read.
I can stay on for like maybe one or two other questions, and I gotta go.
Okay. All right. So Dr. Paxmore asks, are any of the online solutions worthwhile, like LegalZoom? Is that a better starting place if your budget is minimal?
No, I've had to do a lot of cleanup for these websites, so not great.
Yeah. Um, uh, John asked a follow-up question. What would that other resource be in terms of giving guidance and then directing people to resources they can utilize? Like an example of that would be,
Well, I think that'd be specific to everyone's situation, where I would kind of like discuss their situation and provide them like guidance specific to what they're trying to do so that they can kind of effectuate, they take, again, like going to that concept of they taking on the laboring or, and I kind of providing guidance at the high level.
yeah, I think it's important to kind of recognize that context is the key to everything, any
Mhm.
aspect of your life. So it's going to always depend. And sometimes you won't know. And it's hard to give examples of that until, yeah, you just sit down and kind of go over it. And that's kind of like the nice thing is that, you know, setting up a introductory call and having those, like, a quick conversation with a potential lawyer, it's something that's worthwhile and it's good to have and it'll get you on the right track. So don't like worry about that. And then in terms of like ballpark figures, how much should I anticipate budgeting for these kinds of services? Like, kind of like, yeah, Morvareed, you kind of touched on again. It's contextual based. It's dependent on your business, what different moving parts are involved in your business model, your relationships with the different clients that you're operating with, or any other relationships you have. Again, like we talked about earlier, the cap table, the number of partners and potential co-founders, investors that are involved, all these different things add more layers of complexity. So it's going to be hard to say. The best thing you can do is just reach out to a lawyer like Marguerite, set up an introductory call, and find out, see where things are with your situation. Let me see real quick. Yeah, I think that's it. Marguerite, do you have any announcements or things you want to share? We touched on your upcoming hikes, But if you want to reiterate those again, feel free to. But if there's something else that you'd like to share with the community, please do.
Yeah, so again, I do hikes for both the tech and the UCLA community. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me, and I can add you to my list for those. And if you want to basically, if you're interested in a strategy session, you can just go to my website. It's my last name law, so sarpolaw.com, and there's a book online page, and that has the strategy sessions listed, and there's pricing on there for them as well.
Wonderful. And again, everyone that is tuned in, you can connect with Morvareed through LinkedIn. It's on all the event pages that you've used to find your way here. I want to thank you all for participating. Dr. Paxmore, Doug, John, Corporate Bank, the other name I can't pronounce, developer KPE. Thank you again for being bold and brave and asking questions to Morvareed. That's why we do this, so the mentors can interact with you. Morvareed, thank you so much for entertaining me while filling in some space between questions and being a wonderful mentor in the community. Yeah, you're one of my favorite. I say that often. All these wonderful mentors are so appreciated and wonderful, and it means so much that you're able to give back to the community. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. It was good joining you. Good seeing
Okay.
you.